Hi, I'm Steve Moriarty. We are a jeweler on the Square in Crown Point, and we also represent ourselves online at MoreGems.com, where we feature colored stone jewelry by designer Christopher Michael. And we also have Tanzanite jewelry designs, fine Tanzanite jewelry, and www.opallust.com, where we're featuring the opals of Wilo, Ethiopia. Today we're going to be discussing the gems of Tanzania, and I'm going to be cutting a stone, or attempting to cut while I talk, which is not always the easiest thing to do, but we'll see if we can get half of this stone cut. This is an amethyst from Rwanda. I know we're discussing Tanzania gems, but this is very close, just north of Tanzania, and this material was brought into Tanzania and sold via Tanzania, so it's related. And this material is probably the finest amethyst that I've ever seen. I've been at this for 45 years, or 42 years now, and pretty much traveled the world. I've cut amethyst from Zambia, from Brazil, from Uruguay, but this material is by far the finest I've ever seen. And the reason for that is the remarkable colors that it has. And if you look at this material, in certain lights it shows a blue cast, and in other light you can see how strong the purples are, and they'll get red flash. So it really is a remarkable material. This particular stone weighs 500 carats, and I probably could cut it as a single stone because it's clean. So you see very large pieces and extraordinary color in this material. So the amethyst I'm cutting is going to be a round brilliant, which actually works very good in this material. Amethyst of this quality just still has a real fine brilliance, and hopefully we'll get that out of this stone when I'm done. Cutting a brilliant that's a little different than the standard round. Standard round brilliant has 57 facets. This one will have, I think, up to 91 or 97, depending what I ultimately do with it. As you get a bigger stone, extra facets will help in the beauty of this gem. So let me get started here real quick and think a little about what I'm doing. And feel free to ask any questions. Go on chat and ask your questions. It can be about pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be about Tanzanite or Tanzania or cutting. Anything jewelry related. We'll be glad to try and answer these questions. So the first facet I'm doing, I'm cutting this at a little over 44 degrees, and this is going to produce, it's not going to produce the girdle, but I'll get this preformed and then move on to a less coarse lap. We cut with diamond. The machine has an index, which this particular index is 96, so it's got 96 places as you turn it.
Hey, Steve.
Somebody has a question.
Somebody asked if facets are always odd numbers.
Facets are always odd numbers. They are rarely odd numbers. You occasionally do an odd number, but they're much like sandpaper. We have 80 grit, 100 grit, 180 grit. The difference in cutting is when you get to the finer grit, I will end up polishing with 50,000 grit. Sandpaper typically goes to about 2,000 grit in the auto industry. And what we're doing, we're basically producing scratches. And when you get to 50,000, it's still a scratch, but that scratch is half the wavelength of the light, so you cannot see it. And I was talking about the machine. We have an index gear. This is a 96 gear. Different styles of cutting use different index gears, so we can replace this. And here on the side is the angle, so we can adjust the angle. And between that and the index gear, we can place all the facets on the stone.
Steve, at GemTaz, how do you work out the correct angle for maximum brilliance for a freeform gem?
Well, we have a pretty good idea of what the ideal angle is, and mostly it's somewhere around 41 degrees. And it's based on refractive index. The higher the refractive index, the shallower you can cut. Diamonds are generally the pavilion. The pavilion is the bottom portion of the stone that forms the culet. And even in diamond, which has a very high refractive index, they're generally cutting somewhere around 41 degrees. So mostly we cut the culet 41 degrees or greater. Amethyst is 43 degrees, is what considered to be the ideal angle. You can vary them somewhat, but you stick fairly close to what is considered the ideal angle for the material. So as you're cutting a free form, you try and keep it above critical. Critical is generally below the ideal angle. Like, for instance, garnet, the critical angle is 35 degrees, but you're still cutting at 43. But if you stay above 35, you'll still get some brilliance, but better off at 41. grinding like I am now, if your machine's running smooth, there's really no limit. I think this machine operates up to about 900 RPMs, and maybe I'm operating at 300 or 400. But you can operate faster, but faster means more likelihood of mistake and overcutting, and it's the one thing you don't want to do is overcut. You overcut one facet and you got to go back and match them all. So it costs you money because the size of your stone gets smaller. So using a coarse lap, you don't have to go that fast. I mean, if it's a huge stone, you got to remove a lot of material, then you have to operate faster. But high speed is not necessarily a good thing.
They'd also like to know and explain how you exactly set up a bat lap for polishing.
Set up
what to use, and etc.
On a what?
A bat lap.
On a bat lap. Okay, which we won't be using a bat lap here today. But a bat lap, you spray it with WD-40. Yeah, WD something. And where's my WD?
There it is.
It is 40.
Oh, WD.
Yeah. Okay, WD. So you spray the lap with, well, you actually spray it on a tissue, and you wipe the lap down and just leave a little of the WD on it, just slightly, and then you take a finger of diamond, which in the near future we'll be doing stones that require. Oops, that one didn't open. But this is 50,000 diamond, and generally I'll just get my finger a little bit greasy and then put it in the diamond powder, and then just spread it across the lap. Don't want to use too much, and definitely don't want to use too much of the WD. Should just be barely greasy feeling, just enough to get the powder to stick. And you replace it as it slows down in cutting. You got to keep the schwarf off. Schwarf is what you're cutting off the stone, and once it gets blackish, you need to clean it again and recharge it. So right now I'm pretty much just cutting to 0 on the dial indicator. It's fairly accurate, but you can't touch it completely. And when cutting, I would typically use a visor, because I don't want to mess up my hair. So, but a visor is real helpful in the cutting process. Once you start polishing, you have to use a 10-power loop, but the visor will cut you probably in half when you use it for cutting.
Steve, Tab, he wants to know on quartz what liquid is best to look through rough for inclusions.
Well, the material I use is no longer available, but there is a replacement for it. I have referred is hopefully there's still an impression in the glue of the stone, and then you just put a drop of super glue where it was and try and get it placed back as good as you can. Usually you're going to be off slightly, but you're not going to lose a lot. If the impression was good, just try and match it up well. You'll probably end up having to recut it. You know, the only problem using super glue, it's much harder to separate once you're done with the stone. If you have to heat it, it requires a lot more heat. So we generally are using epoxy. That's what I've sealed this with. But if it came loose, I would be putting the stone back on, putting a drop of super glue, and then putting the stone, try and get it to the impression that the glue left. And if you're lucky, there's some high and low points, and you can get it back fairly accurately, but just plan on doing some recutting. About what?
With the cheater.
What? Oh, using the cheater? Well, the cheater's helpful. I mean, you know, in repairs particularly. But hopefully when you cut, the machine is accurate enough, you don't have to cheat. My first machine was not accurate, was not put together correctly. So I had to cheat everything. You know, when you cut, then you go to polish. Ideally, they would match up and you wouldn't have to use the cheater. And the cheater is this device right here, which just turns the index gear to partial indexes. So you would preferably not have to use the cheater. If you cheat when you're cutting, you're going to have to search and find it when you polish. So do everything you can not to use the cheater. If you're using the cheater a lot, there's something wrong with the machine. It's inaccurate.
Hey Steve, Herb Habit, they want to know if there's anywhere they can go to try out cutting gems, because it seems like an expensive hobby, and they want to see if there's anywhere to go to test it out.
Well, not many. I know in Chicago there used to be, the Parks Department used to have classes on cutting. The best place is to probably find a local lapidary club, and they may do it, or you know, you find one of the older guys in the lapidary club has got time, and that's what I did. I had went to a lapidary supply and was there and just started talking to some guy, and Jim Larimore was his name, and told him, I tried cutting, but it was a problem, and I just gave it up. And he said, come on over. You know, they're usually a friendly group, so I went over to his house, and 12 hours later, I'd cut my first stone. And he looked at it and he said, you ought to stick to this, and that's how I got started. So the lapidary clubs would be really the place to look.
He has a similar drip system to you, but the water flows over the whole path. He was wondering if it has to do with overcutting in a certain area.
Run that by me again.
So he's got a similar drip system to you, but the water flows over the whole lap, and he was wondering if it has to do with overcutting. Let me see what he said earlier.
I don't understand.
And he wants to know if you favor one spot on the lap rather than working the whole lap.
Well, ideally you work the whole lap because these are expensive, and if you don't work the whole lap, you'll wear out an area, which you can do that too. You wear out an area, you move to another area. Typically, you'll often stay in one area. I mean, if you're cutting away a lot of material and not trying to be accurate, yes, you can move over the whole lap, but you'll find there's slight differences in the lap. If I put the stone here, put the stone here, my my depth gauge is going to read differently. So whether you sweep thaw lap, eventually you're going to want to do the last bit of cutting in the same spot. It's just more accurate that way. So yeah, use as much of the lap as you can. You know, next stone I cut, maybe I'll move out a little bit and wear it out here. Cutting's really an amazing thing. I mean, it's rewarding to see what you've done, and whether you do a perfect job or a near perfect job, the gems are beautiful and most overseas cutting. You know, my first gem was probably as good as most gems that were cut overseas. If you really take your time and do a great job, you really get a beautiful gem. So I've got most of this first set of facets cut. Could have some issues with some material that isn't quite cut from the rough, but I'll move to the next lap, which is a finer grit. And I try to get to a finer grit probably as fast as I can, just because time. Michael, we have some stones we want to show maybe from Tanzania. Tanzania is really a great source of a lot of variety of stones. They've produced incredible zircon in the case of this stone, and big stones. This stone was 19 carats, and that's probably as big a zircon as I've ever cut. Really a beautiful color. This material starts out very, very dark. It's a dark red color. Difficult to see into, so you never know what inclusions are in them. It's just kind of a crapshoot. They're water-worn pebbles, but this stone actually cut to be a beautiful gem. This kind of large size, and you have to heat the material because it starts out deep color and will be over dark. So this stone I heated and produce this fine color. You can heat it a little more and it can get lighter. Too much and it can go near colorless or yellow. I'm not sure about this material, but some of the other material that we've got, this is Zircon. I don't know if we can see it here. I don't know where the best place to see this is, but anyway, not there. We're still learning this process, so. But these zircons were for my last trip to Tanzania. They're from Singida. And they're interesting. Some of them cut a beautiful stone without heating. Some require heating. You can heat them to yellow. Like this stone, this was a heated Singida stone. So it was brown and heated the stone, and it turned this beautiful yellow color. You can heat it even more to about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and you get a colorless stone. And so if the yellow is kind of ugly, or you know the brownish is not the beautiful color you want, if you cut a nice round brilliant like the one we're cutting here with this amethyst, and you heat this material at 1100 degrees, it goes completely colorless. And most stones have been compared to diamond G color, almost completely colorless. And when it's cut right, it looks like a diamond. We've sold many, many stones, and people just wanted the look of the diamond and not the price of diamond. So zircon's really a great stone, and it's bright because because of its high refractive index. It's over at 181, which is the highest of our common colored gems. Diamond is 252, I think, still much higher, but the Zircon is one of the most brilliant colored gems you can buy.
So, Steve, someone wants to know if there has been a standardized system for grading Tanzanite.
No, unfortunately. Well, it's like most gems of color. There are so many different shades of color that it is difficult to put a grade on it. I mean, Tanzanite, they can be blue, they can be purple, they can be greenish blue, and there's so many variations. When I try and match two Tanzanites, it sometimes takes 20, 30 stones to get two of them to match. So the color variations are dramatic. No system for putting our finger on what is the best. Typically the best are darker stones, but not all darker stones are beautiful. That mix of blue and purple is what makes Tanzanite the beautiful gem it is. But no standardized system. I mean, we've used the AAA system, AA, AAA, for a long time, and it's so abused that it pretty much means nothing. So yeah, there's no standardized system. We've taken up the system that the Tanzanite Foundation started, which separates colors into the ones that are more blue and the ones that are more violet, and then breaks them down into exceptional, vivid, intense, medium colors, and faint, or what's the lower end colors. I can't even think of it right now because we try not to deal in the lower end colors. But and that system's only as good as the person grading it. So, and I find some days I'll look at a stone and I say it's vivid, and the next day I can look at it and say it's intense. So there is no standardized set like GIA produces for diamonds, where they have standardized sets that are graded and they give it D through G color, and they can tell how little color it has by matching those up. But if you tried to do that with Tanzanite, you'd need 100 different stones because there's so many different colors. So no, there's no standardized color grading system, unfortunately, and probably never will be. So I'm moving to a finer grid, and yes, I am turning up speed a little bit because it'll cut slower. So I'm going to go back over the facets I just did.
Garnet the size of a golf ball, but it was oxidized, brown in color, not gem quality. Why is that?
Why is that? Well, we find a lot of things that are big. I mean, you can go down to North Carolina and you can find sapphires the same size, but the quality is not there. They're just not. They didn't form in the slow process in a pure environment. So there's a lot of imperfections, and which is typically what you see in larger material, more imperfect. So here's a nice crystal of Tanzanite. This is quite a large piece. It'll actually cut in two where it looks like it takes a dip in the crystal. I'll have to slice it right down there. But it's going to cut a 30 carat on this side and probably a 10 carat on this side. So nice transparent material. Probably not the top color, but it'll be a beautiful stone. So my trips to Tanzania, this was at the mines, I believe, yes. And I'm with a friend Sunni that has a mine, and he's the only reason I can go in and deal with these guys. These guys were the miners, and we just parked where they go for lunch and water, and just waited for them to come. Sit in the car and they come. You know, the car is a nice, secure place, almost like an office. Very difficult to deal in. You know, you drop a stone and it takes you 10 minutes to find it between the seats. We've all been there. But it protects us from thieving hands, and you know, they're just standing around, they're just shoving stones at you, trying to get you to look at what they've got. And it's a lot of fun. You know, you're lucky to find anything good, but we found some great stones on this thing. You know, so this is kind of the same picture you'll see in every country you go to. You know, you drive into town, you go to Madagascar, and you yell Fatu, and that means stone, and they just come running. You know, you end up with 30, 40 people around, and you know, whether they have stones or not, they're all interested, because in Madagascar particularly, you get back in some of the remote areas, and the white guy, they haven't seen him for, you know, that's just rare. They call you Vasa, you know, big white guy. But dealing at the mines is a special treat, because you know, it's all fenced off, and unless you're a miner or somebody dealing with miners, you don't get into the area. So having Sunni as a friend and a miner, this is his mine. There's Sunni, and you know, so it was exciting to go to there, exciting to go into the mine. This is his old shaft, which they used to climb down. That goes down about 400 feet. If you can imagine climbing that wooden ladder down that far. So this is the new entrance, which is steep, but has steps cut into the walls of the mine, and it actually goes down 1,200 feet. A little claustrophobic, but you know, it was an interesting tour down to the bottom of the mine. As the one person asked about, you know, do you do mining? You know, even on this day, there was nothing in the mine. It was just kind of be able to go down there and see what's going on, but there was no stones to be found. You know, they hid them in pockets, and it can be a long time between finds. You know, although some people go from having nothing to being rich. You know, a friend of Sunni's hit a big pocket, and he started buying new cars, and he built a beautiful hotel there in Arusha. So you can get rich at it. So all these pictures, I got smart and finally took a photographer with. Matt Bigelow is a friend of my son's. Here's Matt, the guy in the middle, of course. And he just made the trip worthwhile. If I hadn't bought a stone, it'd have been worthwhile, just for all the great pictures that we got. You know, it's when I go, I'm a horrible photographer and I don't have time to take photos, but Matt just made the trip come alive. Thanks, Matt. And Matt is Matt Bigelow photographer. So if you need a great photographer, Matt's the guy to go to. And we hope to make a trip late this year to Ethiopia for the Ethiopian opal, and recently
Are they sintered or electrobonded?
They're all electrobonded. I'm not sure you can buy sintered lamps. They may exist, but they'd be really expensive. Electrobonded lamps are $100. A sintered lamp would be $1,000 if they even exist. I think it's hard to get a good flat surface on a sintered lamp. Would probably be the issue. Then this finer lamp, these are Nubon lamps. The nice thing about them, they cut fast, because this is a 320 grit that probably leaves a finish like an 1800 grit. So this cuts quick, and I can go right to polish from this lamp. They don't last as long as metal diamond lamps, but the time it's saved is so important. A few more stones there, Michael. So here's some more garnet from Tanzania. Tanzania, in the last couple of years, has produced just amazing garnet. I mean, things that I haven't seen in all my time in business. They're lighter colors. Typically, garnet is over dark. It's its worst characteristic. Finding light colors in all the colors that garnets come in is the difficult part. And what's been produced from not only from Mahenge, which is an area that produces spinel. Mahenge produced a lot of beautiful stones, and the colors of rhodolite that are coming out currently are light and bright and really extraordinary stones. So I'm around the stone, so I need to go back and kind of make better matches of the facets. This is typically where my visor comes in handy. It helps to have good eyesight. My distance vision is horrible, but my close-up vision is remarkable, and that sure helps me in cutting gems. Alright, so that first row of facets is done, and this next set is typically not in around brilliant, but I've added it because I think it adds beauty to the stone. This will be at the girdle and at a little steeper angle. And it's just an attempt to get a little more sparkle out of a bigger gem with a few more facets. One of our specialties has always been Tanzanite. I have a particular fondness for it. And I can go back to the early 80s when I was on the road selling maybe I had one Tanzanite in my inventory. And Tanzanite at the time was close to 3,000 a carat. known for cutting big stones. Back when I used to do the shows, that's what they knew me for, was big stones. Probably much more profit in small stones, are quicker to sell, and because they're less money, and you make better profit actually.
So someone asks, what grit do you stop at before going to polish in the quartz family?
Well, this is a 325, but it's an unusual 325. 325 in a metal lap you can never polish from. Typically, people polish from 1800 or 3000, and you'll see I'll polish right from this 325. And again, the big bonus is the speed that it cuts, and you don't have to use 3 different steps. You know, most people would cut on a coarse lap and then go to a 1200 and maybe a 3000 and then polish. I'm cutting on a coarse lap, going to this Recutting 325 and then going right to polish. So I cut out steps, and cutting out steps cuts out time. So now I need to cut the girdle. I need to go back to a coarser lap because I have to remove a lot of material. So back to a 180. But again, that comparison of 325 to 180 is not comparable because the Recutting is just a different type of lap. Stones there, Michael? So this is new material. This came out of Mozambique, actually. It's not a Tanzanian stone, but really is a great garnet. They call it grape garnet. This one's not quite as grape as most, but just a beautiful color. Not sure how I slipped that into this Tanzania video, but it is a great garnet. Garnets typically don't come large sizes. Rarity with price is comparable to what diamond is, so the bigger you get, the rarity goes up dramatically. start seeing Ethiopian emeralds on the market, and if the supply holds up, it'll be some of the nicest emerald of any source, because they're clean. The one I've had is untreated, which is almost non-existent in emerald. Almost every emerald is enhanced by clarity enhanced by filling. Usually used to be with oils, but they were not permanent, and now we fill them with epoxies under high pressure, and it'll fill cracks, make them disappear. So this is just something that's accepted in emerald, but you don't see it in these garnets. This is another garnet from Moriarty. Moriarty is where the miners live in Tanzania. It's about a kilometer from the Tanzanite mines, which I don't know if we have any pictures of that, but I have bought Moriarty. Very probably risky place to go, because you literally are the only white guy in town. You draw a lot of attention, and when you're buying stones, they know you have money, and so that puts you at a little risk. Not that I ever feel at risk in Tanzania, because their crime rate compared to ours is so low. I mean, it's almost non-existent. But being in the gem business, you do become a target, because you do have to carry cash. You know, you can't. There's no bank in town, so you're dealing in your car. So you have to take everything with you. So a little riskier from that standpoint, but the rewards are so great. You know, dealing in Marilani with the miners themselves, because a lot of them get paid with stones, and they have to market them, and they may or may not know the real value of it. Some of them just think they have the most valuable thing in the world, and others just have no idea. So you can find some great deals in these small towns.
Steve, someone has a rough 15.5 carat imperial topaz which has a few cracks. When they cut it, should they go for size or try and cut out all the cracks and end up with a 1 to 3 carat? He's planning on cabbing it.
Well, if it's clean, I wouldn't cab it. You know, I mean, it's such a beautiful stone. It's much like that garnet that I have. I mean, it produces very great brilliance, and clean is really the key. I mean, you don't want to leave inclusions. You can just cut your price in half or greater. It can be 10% of what a clean stone is, you know, but typically any inclusion that shows up, you're going to drop the price in half. So if it's a choice between cutting a 6 carat included or a 3 carat clean, you got the 3 carat clean. The 6 carat will be a little deeper color, but it's very difficult to sell included stones these days. And why would you cut a cab? You know, you only cut a cab if it's not clean in the case of that material, in my opinion.
They could find those on our YouTube channel. It'll be under the informational videos. Hey Steve, we got a question from earlier this week that we didn't get to. John W. asks, what's the difference between November and the
Unfortunately, a lot of jewelers offer blue topaz as December birthstone, and blue topaz never was December's birthstone. Topaz is November's birthstone. So we don't typically use blue topaz as the birthstone, but it is topaz that is the birthstone. December birthstone is blue zircon, and the reason they use topaz as an alternate for December's birthstone because it's cheap and available, whereas blue zircon is difficult to get. Although you'll find on MoreGems.com we have a lot of blue zircons. We have a really good connection with a miner in Cambodia, and we do get some really beautiful zircons. So zircon's December, topaz is November. Topaz alternates with citrine, but really the true birthstone. And the birthstones come from the breastplate of Aaron, which goes back a couple thousand years, and they were the 12 tribes of Israel were represented by the 12 birthstones. The list has changed over the years, just like now. The powers to be are trying to make Tanzanite December's birthstone, and people are starting to accept it. So it's been an ever-changing birthstone list, but topaz has never been December.
All right, Stephen Martinez. He has a ruby in a ruby in cylinder geometry fit into a metal piece. It's completely enclosed except for the top face. He wants to know if there's a way to facet the top face of the gem in order to bring out the luster. He's thinking it looks too dark and flat right now.
Well, you can, of course, you can polish them. I mean, you can put them on a machine like this and polish the flats and cut and then polish just as we're doing with this. And it'll brighten them up, but just depending on how, the material probably isn't transparent, but you'll get a better luster and more brilliance typically if you do recut those faces. A really perfect crystal. The faces will be as bright as you could possibly get them, but in an imperfect crystal, cutting and polishing will improve their brilliance, or not brilliance really, but the luster. And you can, well, in most stones you could actually do it. I've cut stones with sandpaper on a stick, but unfortunately you can't do it with ruby, because ruby is as hard as any sandpaper you can buy, because the black wet sandpaper is ruby. So cutting ruby with ruby is kind of like cutting a stick with a stick, and it just doesn't work. So the only thing you can cut ruby with is diamond. looks clean. So now I can go back to the finer lap and finish up. And I still have to cut the culet facets, and then we can go to polish.
Steve, is there a difference in the material blue zircon and imperial zircon?
Well, other than color, no, not much. I mean, they're pretty much the same. What causes the color in zircon, I'm not exactly sure. Some of it has to do with irradiation and maybe producing color centers. Don't quote me on that, but what causes the color of those different materials, I'm not 100% sure. But they have similar refractive index. They both got beautiful bright stones. And the only blue zircon, the finest blue zircon, comes out of Cambodia. And the imperial zircons, which are pretty new to the market, there hasn't been a lot of the material except for the last really 10 years. And it currently is coming out of both Mozambique and Tanzania. And I have them from both sources. They're both beautiful stones. The Mozambique is a little pinker, a little redder maybe. And the best of the Tanzanian material is that fine peach color like Malaya garnet and sometimes reminiscent of, here's one right now, and this one is Tanzanian. And you know, these are the result of heat treatment, which is also a little difficult. Heat treatment is kind of a iffy thing. You just never know exactly what you're going to get. You know, these I actually heat on a hot plate so you can watch the change. A little risky heating on a hot plate with things with inclusions, but the zircons are really tough, and you know, they don't damage easily from heat. But you know, you can heat them just a little too much, and you can go too far and get a color you don't want. So knowing when to quit is always a difficult thing. But by far one of my preferred stones for cutting, just because they're so bright. You know, you do a great job of cutting on them, and you're really rewarded with something that is remarkably brilliant. You know, there's few stones that have such brilliance as zircons. So most of these stones we're showing you are available on MoreGems.com or TanzaniteJewelryDesigns.com. Like I said, next week I think we may talk a little about the Ethiopian opal because it's such a unique material. I mean, and again, on all my time in business, I've never owned opals like are coming out of Ethiopia right now, large sizes, really clear material, can be top crystalline material, which in Australian material, which we've always known as being the best material available, the crystal is the top of the gems and rarely available. And from Ethiopia, it's available in quantity. You'll start to hear more and more about Ethiopian opal as time goes, because it's a relatively new supply. 2008 it was discovered, and only really the last year or two have people really started asking for it. I've been into it since 2012, but people are starting to recognize it. Just takes some time before people see it. Most jewelers do not offer it. A lot of people are afraid of it because it's new. It's hydrophane material, which means it absorbs water, which is its greatest characteristic. Being hydrophane, it likes water. An opal problem has been caused by water in an opal, and they dry out and they end up crazing, which is hairline crack something worth looking at, and we'll take a better look at it next week when we do another one of these live streams. And we're going to try and figure out how to show you the capping of it, which is a little more difficult getting set up for, but we'll see if we can do that for next week. Stones there, Michael? So this is called umbellite. Umbellite, it's another garnet. Again, a color that up to this time I've never had this color before. Umbellite is named after the Umba Valley in Tanzania. Umba River Valley has produced many, many stones. It was famous for the sapphires back 20, 30 years ago. Limited production in sapphire now, but still producing garnets and zircons. Whether this came from Umba is questionable, but the color is known as umbellite. It's just a lighter, brighter color of rhodolite garnet.
Steve, someone asked, so they often pan for gold and gems in the North Georgia mountains, and they're wondering how they could identify rubies and sapphires in the rough without the use of a black light. One commenter suggested using a specific gravity test.
Well, that works if you got the equipment. Yeah, specific gravity probably separate if you have accurate enough equipment. But the crystal shape is the first indication. You know, it's a hexagonal crystal and will form the same shape every time it forms if allowed to do so in an empty pocket. So you look for the faces on the stone. Other than that, hardness would be a big separation. That would probably be the easiest. If you take another sapphire or something of 9 hardness and try and scratch it, if it doesn't scratch it, and you take something that's a little softer like a topaz and try and scratch it, if that doesn't scratch it, you know it's harder than 8 hardness, so it's likely a sapphire. So a scratch test would be a real good way. Specific gravity does work too, but a scratch test will be easier and probably less expensive. You can buy a scratch test kit. Maybe it's $100. I'm not sure. I've had mine so long. But that would be the easiest way, you know. And you just know that a 9 hardness tip on a scratch tester probably won't scratch the sapphire. A diamond would, because it's 10, and 8 hardness, which would be topaz, won't scratch a sapphire. So once you determine that it's above 8 hardness, it pretty much limits what it could be dramatically. Other than that, refractive index, but you have to have a polished surface to do that. Like you say, rubies do fluoresce pretty dramatically, so that would be another inexpensive test. business for 42 years, and I started as a wholesaler selling loose color and mountings to jewelers around the Midwest. Then I got kind of tired of traveling and opened a retail store. In the early 80s, I pretty much started my travels overseas. I went to Germany to buy loose colored stones because they were the best cutters in the world. And then I kind of found out that most of what I was buying from them was being cut in Bangkok and represented as German cutting. But so then I went to Bangkok, and from there started in Brazil buying gems, and then on to Tanzania. And then I did about 10 years in Madagascar, because of the extraordinary gems that are there. You know, it was a place I do want to get back to, because they'll be producing extraordinary gems for all of my lifetime and beyond. There's just so much there. Sporadic availability, a lot of problems with the government and exports, but it's just an amazing country.
Carl noticed that you're not sweeping the lap with your stone, but rather using the same part of the lap. Do you always do this?
Well, particularly when I mean, these facets, as you see, they're taking 2 seconds to cut. So you don't really have time to sweep. I don't sweep cutting too much. You know, I tend to probably wear out an area and then you just move to another part of the lap. Just because that area, if I stay in the same spot, it's gonna make this facet flatter, because these laps tend to not be running perfectly true, so it's a little different out at an edge than it is in one spot. So if you stay in one spot, there's the benefit of being a flatter facet, I guess. And the only reason you sweep generally is to use the entire lap, but you can move on the lap back and forth and use the whole lap eventually without sweeping. Now when I polish, you'll see I sweep a lot more. There's often benefits to sweeping when you polish. Sometimes not. Sometimes I'll, because of problems with the lap and then not polishing, sweeping, sometimes I'll stop in a position. But every stone's different, and you have to do different things sometimes. When you're polishing, or you may have to move to one side of the lap because this lap is approaching the stone at one direction, and if you move to the other, it's actually cutting the opposite direction. So you just have to experiment. If something's not working, you change it. So if I'm having a problem with a particular part of the lap, it's making scratches, I move. It's usually contamination, and next time I use it, it could not be there. But if I find a good sweet spot in the lap that's doing a good job, I don't move a lot, although everybody recommends sweeping, but it's only to keep the age of the lap, keep it, use the whole lap and wear it out evenly. But you can also wear it out unevenly if it works for you. And I change daily what I do. If you're cutting a lot of material with a coarse lap, yes, sweep it, because it's not critical when you're cutting away material to get a really flat facet. That's not the important thing. But when you're on the finer laps, I tend to stay in one spot.
And another common question: what does a typical faceting setup run?
Well, the faceting machines are getting more and more expensive, and a lot of the lesser expensive ones have gone out of business for one reason or another. The manufacturer of this machine, which I love, Nick, has just gotten to the point where he's in his 90s and just quit manufacturing faceting machines. He's into making spectroscopes. He's a very brilliant man that's made some great equipment. I believe he's the original designer of the which was sold to Jarvie later, and then he designed this machine. And both those machines I've used, and very good machines, and these were some of the lesser expensive machines. These were selling about $2,500. So now what's available, I also have Facet, and that was the most expensive, one of the most expensive machines. It was pushing $5,000, but they are also out of business. Unfortunately, it's a small market, not a lot of people buying faceted machines, so I think it's a tough business to stay in. Currently, Ultratech is one of the few that's readily available. There are some new ones coming out. I think Ultratech may be in the $4,000. So you got to expect to buy new equipment, you're going to be spending $4,000 to $5,000 probably. I think there are some cheaper machines, but I've never used them, so I don't know the quality of the machines. Raytech makes one. There's something people call Patriot, but I'm not aware of the quality of the machines.
Carl also wants to know if you're judging the depth of your cut by feel, or are you looking at the dial? They seem to spend forever looking at the facets with their loupe, trying to judge if they've cut enough yet.
The dial's good rough cutting when you're cutting just to rough out the stone. After that, it's almost useless. I mean, the facet that I have, the dial is much better, much more accurate, but still you can't completely trust it. I mean, when it comes down to final cutting, like on this lap that I'm doing, you really have to do it by eye, and polishing is almost all by eye. The gauge is almost useless. Stones there, Michael? So this is chrome tourmaline, and Tanzania is the source for chrome tourmaline. I don't know that it comes from anywhere else. Chrome tourmaline, I personally have quit cutting it. I buy most of the chrome tourmalines cut because it's kind of a nightmare. I mean, you think you have the perfect stone, and more often than not, it's overly dark. And it's also like inclusions are mysteriously show up when you knew there was nothing in it. So it's just a very, very difficult gem to judge in rough. So I'm much better off buying the stones cut where you can see what you actually have. But it's a great stone. I mean, it's not quite the color of Tsavorite garnet. Tsavorite's a little better green, but chrome is close behind it. And this is the Mahenge pink spinel. This has been available for maybe the last 15 years at most. Very difficult to get now. I mean, it's the brightest pink spinel that's probably ever come out of the ground. Comes from the same source that was producing the Mahenge garnets. Very valuable material. I mean, hitting 1,000, 2,000 a carat is common. Bigger stones can hit 3,000 or 4,000 a carat. Spinel's great because it's really good hardness. It's a tough stone. Typically, it comes from locations that also produce sapphire. But I don't know that Mahenge has produced sapphire. They're just commonly found together, like in Sri Lanka and in Burma. You'll commonly find spinels where you find sapphires, and in Ilakaka too in Madagascar. They just have similar chemical formulas, but they do crystallize differently. But just look at the brilliance of it. It's just a really extraordinary gem. They do come in other colors. The reds are extremely valuable. They can be redder than rubies, but very difficult to find. Try not to do that. So the one great thing about Tanzania is when you have a day off, it's like 3 hours to the game parks. You can go see all the animals you want to see. Arusha is the gateway to the game parks. And it's also where much of the gems in Tanzania are marketed. One of the mines that produces alexandrite is at the far end of one of the best game parks. We tried to go there, but it took so long to get through the game park that it was too late to go by the time we got. The travel is always so slow. You go 10 kilometers and it takes you a day. All right, that pretty much finishes the cutting end of this stone.
Hey, Steve. Someone asked, would you ever recut a stone that you bought that has already been cut?
All the time. I buy specifically to recut stones because you know what it's going to look like. And so often the overseas cutters will cut for weight, and they typically take a stone and it can be, you have plenty of depth to cut it right, but they'll cut it this bulbous shape, and then all of a sudden at the cullet, they'll cut below critical angle. So you look in the stone and you can see right through it. It's called a window. So that's something that you can recut and produce a beautiful stone out of it. The problem is when you completely recut a stone, on average, I probably lose 30%. So a 10 carat stone ends up a 7 carat stone. So you have to decide whether you're buying it cheap enough that you can still market that stone profitably with that weight loss. So you got time in it and you got a pretty big weight loss. So those are the issues, but you know what you're going to get. You're going to make a prettier stone and the color is going to stay pretty much the same. If you cut 30% off a stone, it'll lighten a little bit, but not dramatically. So recuts are really a great way to go, and for an amateur, maybe it's the best way to go because it's so hard to find good rough. And when you first buy rough, you're going to make so many mistakes. It's just very, very costly. The first garnet I bought was huge. It was probably 50 carat piece of rough. And boy, I held it up to the light and go, whoa, that's such a beautiful color. But then when I cut it, it was black. It was so dark, but it looked so beautiful in the light. And that's one of the things you learn. You don't judge garnet rough looking up at the light. You lay it on a white piece of paper. If it still looks colorful when you look down on it in good lighting, it's probably not going to be too dark. So these are the things you learn over time. But it's expensive. I spent $500 on that piece of rough, and no way I was going to get 500 out of it. So it's things you learn, and when you recut, you don't have those mistakes because the color is not going to change dramatically. You're just going to lose some weight.
Steve, we got a little debate here in the chat. So they're talking about emerald, and they're wondering, emerald that is
I don't think there's any emerald not colored by chromium. Could be wrong. Things change, new sources. But I think chromium is the coloring agent for emerald. Unlike Severite Garnet, which the coloring agent used to be considered chromium because it has chromium in it, but it's actually vanadium that colors it. And to my knowledge, there is no emerald that's not colored by chromium, and it is one of the determinations of whether something is emerald or green beryl, because green beryl is not colored by chromium. So it is a separation. You know, green beryl is typically lighter, but judging a gem by its color is not always accurate. But I think to be an emerald, I believe GIA might require it to have chromium. Again, could be wrong, but that's my understanding of emerald. Things constantly changing, though. You know, over time, things have changed so much in the gem business, and what was true 20 years ago is not necessarily true today. But I would bet on the chromium issue in emerald. Any bets? So this lap is a thin film. It's cerium oxide is what's on it. It's called a Spectra lap. Comes from 3M Corporation. I've used it for years. Always wish there was a better lap. Some people complain it produces a rounded facet. But I look at the gems I finish and I go, well, if it is, it worked. You know, plus quartz is actually one of the more difficult stones to polish. Everybody has difficulty with quartz. Always looking for a better lap to use. There are some new ones out there that I need to try, but this is an old standby. It works. They contaminate easily, and you have to replace them often. They're expensive. You know, 5 of these cost about $15, and you can end up using 2 of them on a single stone. Or sometimes you get lucky and you get 2 stones out of a single lap. This is a lap that when you do have problems and it produces deep scratches, you just move to another part of the lap. And typically if I'm working well on a spot in the lap, I don't move. I use it until I wear it out and then just move to another part. Michael, give me that jar over there. Typically I do add cerium oxide to it. It makes the laps work longer and faster.
There you go.
Nothing in it.
Nothing in it.
Nothing in it. Let's see if Marcia has some on her desk. Oh, here's my mom. So you just add a little cerium to it and turn the water drip down to just barely dripping so it doesn't force the cerium off the lap. And this definitely increases the speed of cutting. Or polishing, I should say. Quartz typically has a problem of orange peel, and when I get it almost polished, then I move to another direction on the lap, and often it'll get rid of the orange peel, but not always. Sometimes you have to deal with a little bit of it, but that worked that time. And stones there, Michael?
I think we went through them all.
Oh, okay.
Chat, they're discussing different gem labs, saying that the Euro labs have a different opinion on emerald composition compared to GIA. So, is there a standard through these labs, or?
I don't know. Is this in the chromium issue again? I think most of the labs agree with things, but I'm sure there's differences, and I don't follow the European labs enough. I know it'd be like Gubelin would be one of the labs, and so I don't know any specific cases where they're in disagreement, but I'm sure there are things.
John's got another question about zircon. How rare is it?
How rare is it? Well, like any gem, the really top qualities are rare. I mean, it is just so difficult to get the finest blue zircons. If I don't see my supplier before anybody else does, I don't get the best. There's that few of the really, really top-end stones. And it's true of almost any gem. It can be common in average qualities, but the best of the best is always just very, very difficult to get. Zircons are very limited production. It's only Cambodia that produces the finest of the blues. You will see stones out of Tanzania, but the color is not as strong, and the color tends to fade in certain types of lighting. So I don't have a relative number for how rare it is. I would say it's on par with aquamarine, maybe rarer, probably rarer than aquas. There's far fewer of them, far fewer sources. And if the Cambodian source runs out, there's no place else to really go for the really fine goods. And fine is that just deep blue with the hint of green. And almost all zircon, including the blues, are heated. The blues in Cambodia start out brown and are heated to blue. And they're currently adding some material that GIA is not quite sure what it's doing. They can't find that the addition of the material is adding anything to the crystal, and they're just thinking it makes the treatment better, makes it work better, but time will tell. I have some of the material. It's this deep red powder that they say don't breathe it, it's poison, and but it's kind of a new treatment that's out there. So difficult to impossible to detect because it's not adding anything to the crystal. So ultimately, what the labs are going to say about the treatment is yet to be found. The imperial zircons. I have a hard time with rarity because I'm generally dealing with the miners, and when I have it, I think it's available, but I don't see a lot of other people that carry it or have the material in stock. So I just don't know how much is out there in the world. But again, those really special pieces, they're rare in my inventory. I don't see them at the shows, and so exactly what the rarity is tough to say.
So Steve, Carl notices that you seem to put a lot of cerium onto the spectrolite. Do you ever find that too much additional cerium leads to more scratching?
And they call that something in flow. What is the name of that? But I haven't found it with the cerium. I've got quite a bit on here right now, and I'm trying to keep it on the lap with my finger. I suppose if I put more, maybe it'd be an issue. But the only issue I find is just sometimes these spectral labs just eat up the surface and just produce deep scratches, and I still don't know what's going on with that. But I haven't generally found it's because I put too much cerium on it. And I know this addition of cerium will often double the speed that I can polish. And when I wear out this spectrolap, if I keep putting the cerium on it, it'll keep working. So my favorite gem is probably Malaya Garnet. Malaya looks much like the Imperial Zircon, just much rarer. Very, very difficult to get. It looks a little like the round Mahenge Garnet. I probably may have called that Malaya from time to time, but it may not truly be Malaya. Malaya was originally found in the Kangala deposit, which produced incredible rhodolites. For quite a few years, maybe up till 2000, it was producing some of the biggest, finest rhodolites out of Tanzania. And when they originally found the Malaya, it was kind of brownish in the crystal, and they'd throw it out of the hole. And Malaya, which is outcast or translated prostitute, just out of the family. But that peach color is really extraordinary, and in the garnets, it just has a special character for me. And it's why I got into the Imperial Zircon. I saw that, I go, wow, it's much more available, and it's my favorite color, and actually much cheaper than the garnet, and bigger sizes than generally the garnets available.
Someone asked, which lap do you use to polish Topaz?
It would probably be the bad lap. I haven't polished Topaz since I started on the bad lap. I used to use tin lap, but the bad lap came out. It's much harder, produces a better facet, and polishes better in general than the tin lap. But I'm assuming that with diamond will do the trick on Topaz. There's so little Topaz available. The Brazilian Imperial Topaz, just very difficult to come by, very expensive. And blue Topaz is not something I like to cut, just because partly because it's so inexpensive. I mean, it'll cut a beautiful gem, but it's hard to get the value out of it. You spend 4 to 6 hours cutting the stone, and even if you cut a 10 carat, what's a 10 carat topaz worth? $200, $300. And I generally avoid irradiated material, not completely, because I've cut some of the morganite that's currently coming out of Mozambique that is irradiated, and it cuts a beautiful stone. Other than that, I've cut a few praesiolites which are irradiated, but mostly I avoid irradiated stones. They're generally not as valuable, and the stigma of irradiation, producing a color from no color, I guess has been a negative to me and many people in the business. But it definitely hasn't slowed the sale of morganites, because there's a huge amount of morganite out there. It continues to sell well, although there is natural material that comes from Nigeria that is available right now. No treatments for it at all, and possibly heat treatment, but most of the material is natural. And there's a big market for natural. If you can find stones that aren't even heat treated, there are people out there that'll buy them just because they are natural, and we'll pay 20, 30, 40% more. And that's one of the reasons the emerald from Ethiopia is so interesting, because you do find material that's not treated, comes clean without many cracks and free of enhancements. Appreciate you people watching me cut, because I often have people ask me, oh, I'd love to see you cut. Oh, well, it's kind of a boring thing after a while. But to the cutter, the reward's at the end. You know, when you take a piece of rock and see what you do with it when you get a finished product, it really is a rewarding thing. It's an art in itself, and you know, I recommend it to people. I love cutting. Maybe not so much the process, but just producing something beautiful from something that looks like nothing. You know, it is rewarding. Create new cuts. You know, some people cut by design. There are many designs you can cut from, and if you don't feel creative, they're good to use. But when you sit down with a piece of material, you can pretty much do what you want with it. And most often it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the good thing about cutting without a design, you get better yield out of a stone. Work with the crystal and put the facets and follow the material better, you'll get a much better yield out of the material, and if it works, you'll make much more money. Polishing quartz is kind of a slow process. I thought I might finish this during this streaming, but I probably won't get through with this stone. You know, if you ever get a chance, you can take a look at, we did a video on cutting a big quartz, which ended up being 571 carats. That stone took 35 to 40 hours, just because of the size of it. But when it was finished, it was just really a remarkable stone, and you can find that video on our Facebook.
You could also find that video on our informational videos on our channel, our YouTube channel.
So far, but polish the row next to the girdle, called girdle breaks, I guess. This will be a mixed step cut and brilliant. You know, I've just added an extra step around the perimeter near the girdle. Otherwise, it's a version of a round brilliant.
What is best to cut for the yield or brilliance?
Both. In my mind, brilliance is first. Brilliance is always first. You know, that's the difference between an Asian cutter cutting for weight and an American cutter cutting for brilliance. You know, I waste material to get the most brilliant gem, and I think it's the right way to go. I mean, there's still many stones out there that are being sold that are not cut exactly properly. They window in the middle, and when you see the difference of when I recut a stone like that, you know, you won't have to ask that question, because brilliance is really what it's after. You know, you look at diamonds, and nobody cuts a diamond with a window in it. You know, it's much more valuable, and I suppose weight. You know, we price things by the carat, and that's the mentality of the Asian cutter, is we can get the same amount of money for a given weight, and the people buying still kind of have that mentality, and maybe they complain occasionally about my stone being more expensive, but when you put them side by side, there's just no comparison. The brilliance that you get out of a finely cut stone that's cut to the right angles is worth much more than a stone cut with a window or cut with a big belly that just doesn't have the life. You know, so brilliance really is everything.
So someone from the chat wants you to talk about oval cuts.
Who?
Oval cuts.
Opal?
Oval.
Oval.
The shape.
Okay. Well, we cut a lot of ovals, and oval's a popular cut. I've been really into rounds lately, just because anything that's 1-to-1 proportions, like rounds, squares, trillion cuts, will be more brilliant. But you can't cut everything into a round, a square cushion, another popular cut. So you do end up with a lot of ovals because the crystals are long. Just like this piece of rough here. This could be an oval. It could be a cushion cut. It's got flat sides. You know, I would rather it were a big round brilliant, but you know, the difference will be a 30 carat stone or a 40 carat stone. So what's going to make sense is maybe an oval. This will yield fairly well as an oval, and probably be more brilliant than cutting a rectangular stone. Things that are more rectangular have less brilliance, so it's probably going to make sense to cut this as an oval. So anything with longer length width, oval should definitely be in consideration. Just for the brilliance, you know, it's probably next best in line from squares and rounds. You know, the oval, as long as the proportions aren't too long, the longer the proportions get, the longer the width is to the length, the less brilliant it's going to be. And if you take a deep colored stone like this and cut a real long stone out of it, it's going to be dead on the ends. It's going to be black. So you do have to be careful. The long length of width will get darker. So cutting a squatty oval is better than cutting a long, thin oval in dark material like this. Fortunately, this is not far from being equivalent length to width. So if I cut an oval out of it, it should be a very nice stone, and that's probably what we're going to get out of this stone. There's a lot of good oval cuts. You have to determine whether you're going to cut. This has a keel, so we cut an oval with a keel and we'll get better weight. A keel will be a longer culip rather than coming to a point like a round does. There are ovals that come to a point, but it wouldn't be a good yield on a stone like this. So this one I would cut with a keel. And a little more limited the styles of cuts you can do. And with a keel, they're a little less brilliant, but not a whole lot of choice in this stone. Cuts I like, there's a design I followed, I think, an ostentatious oval is a cool cut. If I can think of his name, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's Arya Akavan. Met him once in Tucson, and he does some real nice designs, and that's a cut I've used that is very pretty, but it doesn't work on this stone. So this stone I'll probably sit down and just make up something as I go, and hopefully it ends up a beautiful stone. Nice big amethyst. You can, just a beautiful color. Again, it's a Rwanda amethyst. Anything else you want to know about ovals?
Looks like we're having some issues with the video feed. Lagging out. Let me see if there's something we can do.
Yeah, maybe it's time to wrap it up.
Yeah, sorry about the video issues here. I will see if I can look into that issue for the next stream. So Steve's gonna go ahead and close it up here.
You still working?
No, it's dying out.
Well, if you're still there, I want to thank you for watching. We will be back next week, Friday, probably at 6:30. And I think we're going to talk more about Ethiopian opal, which is one of the newest and greatest finds probably in this millennium. Discovered in 2008, and just great production. And we're going to show you a little bit about the cutting and a little more information about the opal. So thanks again for watching. I'm Steve Moriarty from Moriarty's Gem Art, a jeweler on the square in Crown Point, and MoreGems.com. So hope to see you again. Thanks.